Welcome to a podcast about wealth and life. We all know that our finances play a big part in how we live our lives. In this podcast, the advisors from Foster and Motley share insights and information about investment and financial planning topics and how they connect to your life.
Peanut butter and jelly, Bert and Ernie, Laverne and Shirley, Foster and Motley. For more than a year, the financial planners and investment managers at Foster and Motley have shared their knowledge and insights on this podcast. But how did the firm come to be? I'm Patrice Sikora, and with me are Dave Foster and Mark Motley. Yes, the Foster and the Motley. They do exist. Gentlemen, I got to say, it's really
Not
wonderful.
Good to be here.
It's wonderful to have you here. Now, how long have you guys known each other? That long, huh?
It's 91. Hard to do the math. What is that? 32 years?
I think it's, yeah.
Wow. Mark, you get to tee it off here. How'd you get into finance? Did you always want to do that?
No, I stumbled into it because I didn't know what I wanted to study. And I thought I needed to be as broad as possible. So I got into business generally. But then in the course of that, I took some investment courses and got very interested in that. And so it was really school that helped me find it.
And where did you start out?
I worked for a bank trust department in Lexington, Kentucky for 6 or 7 years, maybe 6, in the 80s, mid-late 80s. And it was a very different environment than we have today. When I first started, we had no PC desktop computers. We had terminals to the mainframe, or probably mid-frame computer. And there was one PC in a common area. But within a year or so, we had PCs. But this is such a technology-driven business today. It's remarkable how backward we were technology-wise in 1983 or 82, whatever it was.
Yeah, it wasn't backward at that time, though.
No.
It just wasn't there. But so many developments have occurred in such a short amount of time. Yeah. Was anyone in your family in finance that might have sparked this? No?
It's always interesting. There's something challenging and interesting every minute, it seems like. And so it's always been fascinating to me because of that. It's nothing else.
All right. Dave, though, you have a different story here. You really loved the finance.
That's true. It started early with a 3M bookshelf game that we had in our house. I was the youngest of 5 kids, and we had this game called Stocks and Bonds. And I loved that game and made my older siblings play it with me till they were sick and tired of it. Yeah, I love that game, and kind of always knew I wanted to go into business. Went to college, studied accounting, ended up working for public accounting firms and gravitated towards the tax world, and eventually just knew I wanted to give people advice on financial planning. And for a number of reasons, you just couldn't do that in the public accounting environment back in the late 80s. They were worried about SEC regulation and how much you could say and couldn't say. And so I left and started my own firm at the end of 1989 just to do financial planning for people. So that's my story.
All by your lonesome?
All by my lonesome.
Wow. How long did that last?
Really, till Mark and I got to go. Well, I had employees, but in terms of a partner, it wasn't so. Yeah. So I think maybe about 9 months in, I hired a part-time lady to help, and she worked with us for till she retired. She was a great employee, great advisor. So yeah, I was really on my own till the end of 96 when Mark and I decided to throw our hats in together.
And there were 2 part-time employees there. They'd worked for you before.
Yeah.
What prompted you to say, okay, let's do our own business?
So I had moved to Cincinnati, left the bank to join a registered investment advisor. After 6 or so years there, they sold to a brokerage firm. They had some brokerage connection. They originally started as a broker, and that the world's been moving away from brokers towards registered investment advisors for years. That seemed like a backward direction to me. So I left and hung out my own shingle. And Dave and I had known each other for a few years prior to that point, but I was just in a temporary office space downtown. And then Dave had been sharing space with 2 other firms. He can elaborate on that, a little, unique arrangement. And in one of those other two guys, he was by himself, took a job with a firm, pretty established firm in Columbus. And so he had some office space to sublease essentially. And it was about a mile from my house. Dave knew me and contacted me. And so that made perfect sense. And then we began immediately to talk about doing more cross referrals than we'd done before, although we knew each other and had done that. And then it quickly jumped into, we really ought to look at a merger of these two very complementary disciplines. And wealth management it barely existed. I think it maybe had the name existed, but it wasn't widespread then. And so we can't claim that we had some great vision that, oh, this is the way we ought to do it. But when we stumbled into it through office space issues, then we at least we give ourselves the credit that we at least saw that the light bulb went off. Oh, this really makes sense.
Now, you mentioned complementary businesses. What exactly does each of you do? Or did you do at the time?
Yeah. Well, very simply to answer that question, I do financial planning, helping people with decisions about cash flow and college and estate and tax planning and investments. I understood and knew asset allocation in broad categories, but I wasn't going to help people pick and choose stocks and bonds and that sort of thing. That's a whole nother skill set and requires 8 hours a day. My job required 8, whatever. Whereas Mark is an investment professional and loves diving into the details behind bonds and stocks and why this one and why that one and what makes a good investment. Yeah, they're very different, but totally complementary.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, you had this empty space here, this desk. What made you reach out to Mark? Why Mark?
Yeah, we had met sometime at, I think, at a NAPFA conference or maybe before that, I don't know, in the early 90s. And I also had a couple clients that used their investment advisory firm, the firm that Mark worked at. And then we actually had a mutual client. I had a client that ended up hiring Mark and another professional there. So we had
I think
contact.
That was a referral from you.
Yeah, I think it was, but it was the attorney was involved. We had contact. In fact, Patrice, this morning I found a note where I had set up a little business advisory panel with 3 people that I respected and trusted in the community. And one was Mark, another was an attorney, and another was a friend of mine from college who was a astute business person. So from 1992, I found a memo where I was setting up our first meeting. So
and that was the date of that, 92?
Yeah, it was October 92. So obviously I had a lot of respect for what Mark did at that point in time. And then we just kind of kept running into each other at different conferences and other things. So.
And it was in 96 that I actually moved into that space. It was a mile from my house, and I would walk to work most days. And for several years we were there. And in fact, if I needed a car for a luncheon downtown or whatever, I might talk to Dave about borrowing his car when I walked very often during that period.
And you were over. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, you had to know how to drive a standard shift if you were going to borrow my car back then.
Best cars. Nobody can steal
exactly.
them. At the train station, you're safe. You're safe. So you were over a Fifth Third bank branch?
Yeah.
It was actually North Cincinnati Building and Savings Loan before it was acquired by Fifth Third. So it was just a local savings and loan in the beginning.
Okay.
Yeah.
It was Fifth Third by the time I got there. We had half of the second floor, and that was split up by originally 3. And then when Dave and I got together, it was 2 firms split that space. Mm-hmm. And we got tight. We grew and they grew, and we liked the location a lot. And we were hoping they were going to move. And I think that the same was, on the other side. And we reached waiting to see who's going to blink first. But finally, they moved out. And so some of the other folks that Dave actually had an office at one end, and I had an office at the other. But there are several folks that were crammed into this common area in the middle. And some of them have stories about sharing offices when they first, came. Because we were there a few years, Dave. Can you recall?
Yeah, at least 4 or 5. I mean,
4
I was there longer than that, probably. But
yeah.
So a little bit of the background on that, just real quick. I was very briefly in subleasing from an accountant friend of mine, and then I met these 2 other guys who were both solo planners, just like me, fee only, and we decided to rent space together. We were friendly competitors, but back then, like Mark talked about you had to pay for subscriptions of hard copy and all this kind of stuff. And there's no reason for one person to buy that. We would share it among the three of us. We shared a lot of periodicals and a lot of services that were expensive for solo new practitioners. So anyway, the three of us shared office space for several years. And then, like Mark said, one of the gentlemen moved up to Columbus, and I've stayed pretty much friends with all of them for a long time. We'd see them at conferences often, and they've all done well, but it was fun. And every now and then we had tricky issue where a potential client would show up interviewing one of them down the hall and then us down the other hall.
Yeah.
But it was fine. It was really good. It was always like, hey, whoever they choose, that must be the right decision for them. It was not a big deal. And I think it only really happened once that we knew about, where the same day they came in, talked to one of the gentlemen, left our office, came back, talked to us. It's funny.
They were back to back though, right?
They were back
Those
to back,
interviews,
yeah.
yeah. We shared, the receptionist was shared along with copy
Mhm.
machine, fax, and all that.
All that stuff.
How can I put this nicely? How long did it take the two of you to really mesh? Did you have issues coming together for the first time in an office?
So I moved in there I think it was April 1st. It might have been March 1st. But it was probably January when we knew it was going to happen. We just I had some time to get out of the other commitment. And so through most of 1996, I was still a separate firm. We were sharing space, but we were talking about, we knew before I moved in, we walked through that we wanted to explore the merging. And so we got together, was it every other week, Dave? Does that sound right?
It's pretty often.
We had on the calendar blocked out a couple of hours, an hour and a half at the end of the day on whatever Wednesday or whatever it was, every other week or at some frequency, just to talk about the big picture items. And we didn't have any urgency or didn't feel any pace pressure, if you will, until the calendar flipped over to, suddenly we were in October and we realized, wait a minute, if we're going to do this, we really ought to do it from January 1st. So we're not running sort of two sets of books. And so at that point, we scrambled to make it happen by the end of the year. So we had no sense of urgency until we did. And then we rushed. Yeah. So the Foster and Motley was technically formed in late 96, but it was open for business at the beginning of 97.
How did you decide on staffing?
The staff that we had was the two that had worked for Dave before. That was initially. And then I don't know when we hired anybody else, but we pretty quickly decided we do need, growth was never a goal. And Dave sent out a letter, and someone found a copy of this recently to clients to talk about encouraging them to stay, create this new firm, Foster Motley. And he specifically said in there that we don't have any plans to become $1 billion firm. That we didn't. And we never, through all the years, even to today, we've never had a growth goal. Okay. We've had different kinds of goals, but not a growth, not to be a certain size. But we did decide pretty early on, I don't know how it hit us, but it was fairly early. We decided what we do is complementary, but it is not, I can't serve as Dave's backup and he can't serve as my backup. We can't fill in for each other. And so we're too thin right now. We need to, just for clients' continuity protection, we need to get to the point that we've got two professionals on each side, two portfolio managers, two financial planners. And so we fairly early set a goal for that. And that was our growth goal to grow staff to that point.
Yeah, I will say, just going back to how did we mesh? We're both pretty careful, thoughtful people. So we spent a lot of time going through issues and looking at different things. Neither one of us jumped into it without giving it a lot of thought. Again, the whole staffing thing, we've been really lucky. We had a couple missteps along the way, but when we needed somebody, we started looking. And a lot of times we were just asking friends or other people, did you know somebody, or people we used to work with? And we've had a lot of good people who've come through the doors and are still here. Not me, I've retired, but other people. So anyway.
First professional hire was to fill in to help Dave. And he decided that it was at that stage easier to hire someone part-time than full-time, but that was just the goal. So he thought maybe someone that was a CPA, but maybe a mom and had the kids, but the kids are a little older and has time to work part-time, whatever. Thought that might be, and someone that would help him with his taxes, because he still did a fair amount of tax work during tax season. And so we looked for that, a part-time CPA person that would be open and interested to expand into financial planning. And we actually found two in that search that we were so impressed with that we just hired both of them. Mm-hmm. We couldn't make a decision. Yeah. So that was our first hire.
Yeah.
Yes.
And one of them, Amy, is working. Yeah. Maybe not down the hall, but maybe she's at home today. But yeah.
Yeah. You guys have been through some very historic moments in the markets and the economy. What are some that you remember, and you really have? What are some that you remember?
Yeah. One that it sticks out in my mind, partly because this reminds me of it today, was Dave and I were doing a radio show, guest for a radio show locally, and On the Money was the name of it. Dave knew Chris DeCimio, who ran it, good guy, and this was right in the height of the financial crisis, late 2008, November or something like that. It was a Friday, late morning, and the show was, we'd been on before, and it was live before, but at this point it was taped and it played on Saturday. So we had to talk as if we were speaking live on Saturday, knowing what had happened the day before. But the day before was Friday. It was the Friday that Congress was meeting to decide on the big controversial bailout legislation, and markets were hanging on every word. And I don't remember whether the first time passed or didn't. And the market was, and 700 points on the Dow was a bigger deal then than now. Anyway, it was one of the most volatile days in market history. And we were talking as if we were talking on Saturday, knowing what had happened during. So that was an interesting conversation to have. It worked out okay. I don't remember how, but it somehow did.
Yeah, I think 08, 09 was the most challenging time period of my career when it comes to dealing with and talking to clients. It was rough. There were times I drove home and I was wondering if the advice I was given was right. And I don't know that I had ever experienced that till then. I always felt a high level of conviction and diversification and discipline and stick with the plan. And now in the long run, I think, again, sticking with all those convictions was the right thing to do. In hindsight, it was. But there were times I drove home wondering, man, am I telling these people the right thing? I don't know. It was crazy.
There were so many doubts about, is it all going to hang together or fall apart? And as a business, this business goes in cycles, and sometimes it's great. Sometimes it's really tough. And sometimes it's just sort of nonstop, tough, challenging conversations with clients who are very concerned. They're not upset with us, but they're just concerned about the world and really fearful. And that's when we help them the most in many ways. And they recognize and appreciate that. But it's still, when a client is just ready to give up, I can't stand it anymore, market pain. It's silly and away from it. But in the minute, that's in that moment, that's where they are. So many, not all, but many say in a really severe market decline, the market has gone down by this much and my portfolio has gone down by this much. And if that happens again, then I can't do that. So I can't handle that. Therefore I got to get out. And that's not a rational way to think about the world, but it's natural in some cases. So there were times along the way, and will be in the future, and those tough times for clients, and those are certainly memorable. Some of the other memorable times that aren't market related were the different offices. We doubled our space in the same place when the other firm moved out. So that was one. And then we moved to another building in Madeira, and that, I don't know, doubled the space, I think. And then we had an opportunity to take different space in the same building and doubled again. And then so there have been several, and then we moved to this space, and that was over 10 years ago. And then we expanded here last year, 2 years ago. And so the one of the sort of ways to keep track of it is where we were along the way in terms of space and people. And it's certainly grown a lot in terms of people and clients we serve. We didn't ever plan on that or design it, really. It just sort of happened.
How about technology? How have you dealt with that?
That's been a huge change. I mentioned a little bit about the lack of that when I first started back at a bank in the 80s, early 80s, mid. The portfolios were very simple then. No international stocks, no small stocks. There was 20 usually large companies and some investment grade long-term municipal bonds, and that was it. Two asset classes, a little cash. And that was what we could do with what was available. Things have really changed. The one aspect of technology that in some ways we're most fortunate about is that not too long before COVID, so much of what we did migrated to the cloud. And so we had many of the various platforms we work on weren't on our server, they were on the cloud. And then we migrated from desktops to laptops for the professionals. And so we take home and work, and we worked through the networking issues largely, and that was pre-COVID. And if COVID had hit maybe 2 years earlier, we and a lot of other folks would have been really challenged in terms of technology, but as it was really smooth. We got several extra monitors for people to set up dual monitors at home, and we had to upgrade a few internet connections and things like that. But other than that, it's at some level immediately, but really smoothly within 4 to 6 weeks after shutting things down with COVID, we were in pretty much as good a shape working remotely as in the office, technology wise. And that would not have been, we stumbled into being ready for that, and that we would not have been 2 years previous. I'm pretty confident.
And it's pretty amazing for an industry that kept saying, we have to be in the office, we have to go see our clients, we cannot work from home. That change of mindset, yes, it was necessary, but that's dramatic.
Very much. Although we could keep it going, but I don't think we could thrive indefinitely being remote. Some things that we need to do really involve collaboration, and that is much better in person. So we can keep the maintenance, the basic things going, but some of the development, some of the idea part of the business really needs to have people interacting, I think.
We had some good help along the way, for sure. We hired a guy, Joe, who was our outside chief technology officer, and he was by our side for years and years. Early on, we had to figure out the technology. I remember going to conferences and looking at storage technology and client relationship management software. We were the ones who did that and came back. But I don't know how long Joe worked with us. Do you remember we had that ice storm or something? We actually took all of our stuff, like the power was out of our building, to his house. He took it, he reset up our whole server in his house, and we were working. And he has 3 little kids at this point in time. Yeah. And we're over there working in his dining room with our server.
All of us.
So it was crazy.
Around the island in the middle. Yeah. It was Hurricane Ike, I think was the name of it, that went through the Gulf. It was in the spring. It was a strange time of year for a hurricane. And I think that was the one. Anyway, it came up from the Gulf, but it was a pretty strong storm that blew through here, and we were out of power for days at the office. 6 days, 7 days. Yeah,
maybe more. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
We weren't as well set up to work remotely then.
No. But it sounds like I'll bet you the coffee was better.
I'm a tea drinker.
All right, gentlemen. Before we wrap this up, I want to ask each of you, is there one thing you've always wanted to say to the other? What would it be?
Put us on the spot there.
Yeah, I think we've said some of it, in terms of, I don't know. The one thing I've said before, like when we were getting together, I was like, okay, I haven't worked beside this guy, but I know he's smart. I know he's ethical. I know he's honest. I know he keeps clients' best interests at heart. I thought all that in 1996 when we were kicking the tires, and nothing ever changed to dissuade me from any of those things. They were all true, still true. Mark's heard me say that before, but it's the truth. And I was pretty lucky to be part of that.
I had the opportunity to say a few words at our Christmas party on the end of the year when Dave was retiring. A few words about Dave. It was brief, but very carefully prepared, and was able to say, what I wanted to say then. And I think it was good. I don't remember any of the words right now.
It was too long for this podcast.
It was too long. It wasn't long, but basically it was just what a fine person Dave is at every level, not just a business person to work with, but in just a good heart and totally honest. And no one's ever gone wrong by trusting Dave. And none of those words were in there, but all that sentiment was. And so I actually had a chance to say that to him before.
All right. Dave Foster, Mark Motley, thank you so much for sharing this time. For the latest episode of Foster and Motley's podcast about life and wealth, follow this podcast and share with others. I'm Patrice Sikora, and gentlemen, this really was a lot of fun.
Thank you for listening to Foster and Motley, a podcast about wealth and life. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. The information discussed and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Foster and Motley. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional financial advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions regarding your financial planning and investments. Foster and Motley is not affiliated with any third-party providers. Any mention of a third-party provider does not imply an endorsement of that provider. If you decide to utilize a third-party provider, you do so at your own risk.